All right, welcome to Simple Healthy Life, where our goal is to have real, insightful conversations on topics that we find interesting. And today, MJ, I have a really interesting topic. This one is basically started off as a question, and the question is what makes any one moment transformative, right? And the fact is that there are moments that are particularly impactful for us, right? There is moments in time where we either look back or we feel it. And we're like, wow, I had a deep insight, or this changed me in some way, or that experience was very profound for me. And, I've been thinking about this topic a lot, and I'm trying to think of, specifically like the ordinary moments that feel transformative, because they're also like you go about your normal day, and for whatever reason you could do the same things every single day, but there might be a moment in there that does feel particularly different. And that's just one case example. Of course, you can go out and do new things that are obviously, can be transformative, right? Such as experiencing new people, or we were just talking about like traveling, right? Like traveling can be very profound for people because you're experiencing something very new and insightful. It's like, whoa, like they live that way. That's very interesting, right? Um, but the classic example that I usually think of, this like kind of ordinary moment that becomes transformative, is like the tale of Isaac Newton, right? You heard that one. So this, I don't know if this is actually like the true story, like how it actually happened, but I think
It's
it
definitely the third grade version.
yeah, the third grade version. So Isaac, yeah, that's about as much as I know about him, right? So for those who don't know, right, like he's doing all this studying and research on whatever he's gravity, I suppose, um, or maybe the parts leading up to gravity, right? And then he goes and apparently sits under an apple tree, and the apple falls on his head and clunks him hard enough to think, huh, wow, gravity is a thing. Objects fall, right? And then he had done all this kind of research and studying and whatever to in that moment have this kind of like eureka, like, oh wow, this is what gravity is all about, or and I think it demonstrates the point that it was a very ordinary thing. Apples fall all day long. I'm sure he's seen objects fall all day long, but it was the perfect moment in time. It was something special about that moment that made it different, right? Even I don't know if you can recall also from third grade, Archimedes, right? So Archimedes, the and subsequently the Archimedes principle. This is where uh, the volume of an object displaces um, in amounts equal in water that to itself, right? So if you put something in water, it will displace the water the exact volume of that item, right? And so the tale of him was that the king had commissioned a crown for like a spiritual practice from a goldsmith. And so the king had actually received this crown and then had been kind of a weary of it. It was a little sketchy, I suppose. And so then he basically went to Archimedes and said, "Hey, can you figure out if this is real gold or was I bamboozled by this crown?" And so Archimedes was a very like notable scientific figure, I guess, in this story too. This is also kind of a tale, as far as I know. And Archimedes said, "Yeah, okay, I can figure that out." And he's going through his day, and he's really like racking his brain. He's very curious, like, how do I figure out if this is gold? And he actually, what he noticed is he was stepping into the bathtub and recognized that when he stepped in the bathtub, water rose. And so, eureka, like you can place items into the bathtub and recognize that that there's buoyancy there. And so, that was again another ordinary moment that is transformative. He stepped into a bathtub 100 times, hopefully more than that, and hadn't recognized buoyancy existed. Yet it took there was a perfect moment for him. The curiosity, the quest he was on, the commission, everything aligned in that moment, and his readiness aligned in that moment to had come to that realization. So I guess the point is that these moments exist, right? They exist in your life. I know that for a fact, and they've existed in my life. And I want to kind of talk about what makes them transformative, what makes them different. And so I guess the first question is, what is your transformative moment story?
All right. So as you're talking, I was thinking about a couple things.
Mm-hmm.
What you're getting at, what you're asking for me is, an example would be not the day I got married, but the moment I decided to marry my wife is more of like the transformative piece, right? The marriage, the wedding day was like all the pomp and circumstance. And
Mm-hmm.
sure, on the paper, as far as the state is concerned, that's the day we got married. But the actual moment, what was that like, right? Like that's the transformative moment. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, the wedding day can be transformative, and these big novel things and big events can be and are transformative. But I guess it's more curious to me why ordinary moments are transformative.
And I was thinking about like just kind of the way you said it, like this aha moment. Like I'm reminded of like all of these movies that we watch, the shows that we watch, where like the person's trying to figure out like who done it, and then all of a sudden they look and they see the book, and there's the book that the killer left, and like and like just from watching the show, like dun dun dun, there's the moment, right? And that feeling that you get even as an observer, like there it is, right? So I think when I think about a moment that I had, seemingly innocuous, I actually have a very specific memory. As we've talked about in the podcast, at some point in my life, I had put on quite a bit of weight through poor eating habits and all the stuff that we do when we put on weight. And I actually remember getting out of the shower, stepping out of the shower, looking at myself, not even in the mirror, just kind of looking down at myself and realizing this was not the body that I wanted to live in. And that started me on my weight loss journey. And up until then, I had noticed I was putting on weight. Like I went from basically like 210 pounds. I wrestled in college at 197, so 210, walking around at all the way to 265. And I'm at least self-aware enough to have noticed, right? 230, 235, 240, right? There's time there. And I had said to myself, I'm gonna lose the weight. I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna eat different, and nothing really worked. But then one day, I actually do remember standing there, just getting out of the shower and being like, "That's it. Like this is. I don't want to live in this body anymore." So that was a transformative moment for me, and there was no one around. I didn't tell anybody about it. I just was like, "That's it for me. I'm ready to start this weight loss journey," and I was successful. But it was self-guided, self-imposed. But so that's the moment.
Yeah, I love that, and it's a perfect example, right? What went into that moment to make it transformative, right? That you've stepped out of the shower plenty of times. You in that process of kind of like gaining weight, habits weren't so great. You've done that so many times. You've recognized even your position in those moments so many times. Yet there was one time, and how long ago was this?
2008, 2009.
Yeah. So, well over 10 years ago. But there was one moment and you still remember it. And
Very
you probably, and actually what marks a transformative moment is the fact that it tells a story, if not to other people, then to you, to yourself. But there's probably still some emotion that you feel. Like you probably still feel the emotion from that day.
Oh, 100%. And I can picture, it's like I can close my eyes and I mean, I can picture the bathroom. Like I can picture the tub. I can picture where I was standing. I can picture what I was looking at. And yeah, for sure. And that, yeah.
Tell me your emotional profile on Saturday after you stepped out of the shower.
No idea. Yeah, exactly. Even this morning, no recollection of it. I mean, and I've lived in a few different houses, a few different places. I don't really remember the shower specifically, but for some reason that moment was, there wasn't even a scale in the bathroom. And I remember that very specifically because I was like, oh, now I got to go figure out exactly where I'm starting point. But I remember thinking, and it wasn't thinking, I want to lose the weight. That was the difference. Normally, you know, you're laying in bed, you're like, man, I got to do something. I'm not feeling my best, or I want to look better, or whatever. It was like, oh man, I don't want to live in this body anymore. That's not capable of playing basketball or doing the things I wanted to do, and I'm too young to be just putting on all this weight.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think it's such a great example, and I appreciate that. And actually, very similar to, you know, one of my transformative moments. It was like almost verbatim, except I didn't step out of the shower. I just kind of like looked in the mirror, right, and I almost had a conversation with myself. I told this one, you know, to you and on the podcast before, and for whatever reason, this conversation with myself, I don't remember the exact details, but I do remember the essence, the story there, that I wasn't super happy with how things were going, that no one was going to come and fix my problems. You know, that was another, you know, long thing. And, you know, I was pretty young too. And for me to remember any, maybe this is trauma, for me to remember any bit of my childhood is it's all a little shady, a little tinted. But that moment I certainly remember, you know, and I don't even remember much about, to your own point, I don't remember much about the house, but I do remember that bathroom, and it was kind of a decrepit looking bathroom. And yeah, I mean, everything had been perfect in that moment to yield to transformation. And so I guess that is the question: what makes that profound? You know, and this is not just you and I. I know that people have these moments. I live through people having those moments as I talk with them, and I know, you know, just from talking with friends and family, that those exist. And so I did some research.
Perfect.
Yeah. I did some research because I think if we can figure out what makes those moments tick, then we can invite those moments, right? The ancient Greeks had a term for that kind of feeling, this opportune moment, this transformative moment, this moment that is like pregnant with potential, and they referred to that as Kairos, right? So this Kairos is not Chronos. Chronos is this other kind of ancient Greek term meaning linear time, right? So I actually don't know if Chronos was like a god too, or some,
I think he was.
some figure, yeah. But this figure represented the clock and time and moving time, right? Like we all understand that. We have watches, we have phones, we have calendars. Like that's what Chronos represents, linear time. You can pick a time and say Saturday. Yep, that's linear time. That's Chronos. Kairos is more about the qualitative, the qualitative side of time. So by that, it represents a specific moment, an opportune moment. And Kairos in ancient Greece was also represented by a figure who I don't believe was a god, but it was some type of figure, some story that they had, you know, drummed up. But it's kind of interesting. They represented him as this this winged man who who was mostly bald but had a tuft of hair on the back. And the idea was that Kairos is very fleeting, right? It's like the opportune moment passes you by, and you have to be ready for it. You have to be ready for this opportune moment, because if you're not, then he will run right by you, and you will have no chance for this opportunity that passes you. And the hair represents that he doesn't have a lot of it; he just has a little bit. So you really have to be ready to like wrangle him in by the hair. And I thought that's like so interesting. And so basically the point of that is these are called Kairos moments, these transformative moments, these moments that are you know, are riddled with potential and riddled with change, potential change, is a Kairos moment.
That's pretty interesting to me. So the Greeks were thinking about this way back then, and I think it's so cool how the Greeks managed to like personify these things, right? Like turn this thought of a moment that's to your like pregnant with potential into like a being, right? I think you said he had wings on his feet, and like in this tuft of hair you have to grab and catch and hold on to. And fast forward, I mean, like all the way, there's always been these people that are talking about, you know, I mean, to bring in Eminem, this is your moment, you own it, right? Like these are the things that you can't give to anybody else. They have to be, you internally have to be ready for them.
Mm.
I can't grab Kairos and give them to you. I have to grab them for myself. And at the beginning, what you said, it's Chronos versus Kairos. It's so real to me because I don't even remember the date that I had this moment, but I remember right now sitting here talking about it, the feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and I can almost manage to bring that call that feeling back up.
Right.
And it was certainly attached to my own narrative about myself,
Mm-hmm.
which was pretty interesting. That's one of the things that changed in the moment.
Yeah.
Like I had told myself for a long time that I was gonna, or I should, or, it didn't never outweighed the steak and cheese. It never outweighed the choices that I was making. But that day, all of a sudden, it did. The narrative changed. I'm good enough to do this. I can do this. I just have to put the work in, and I can go after my new, real, tangible goal of, living in a different body that I'm proud of and can have longevity and all the things.
Mm.
So yeah, I was able to catch Kairos at that point, and unknowingly. But I think that, and I know we wanted to get into kind of how to prepare ourselves for that. I think I was unknowingly preparing myself to catch him or them by this narrative that I had developed over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring that up, kind of on your own, the narrative significance, because, this question, very compelling to me. I'm still compelled by it and want to learn more about it. But as I try to detail out the anatomy of these Kairos moments, that is one of them. The narrative significance. It has to tell a story to you or to other people or whoever, because a story is really only a story with transformation. I guess I think we had I think in the podcast with Erica, and she was talking about storytelling. We kind of dialed that down. That, like, sometimes I think there has to be change for a story to even be a story, right? It can't just be nothing, right? And so, anyways, so narrative significance is one part of the transformative moments that we experience. Internal readiness is another part. So you have to be ready and open and curious and ready to receive the change. How do you, there could be a story there as you're sitting there, looking at yourself. But if you're not really ready for that, then Kairos is passing you by, essentially. I suppose the third thing would be then the external alignment. So being in the right time, being in the right place, that kind of demonstrates that it is a fleeting moment in some way. So I don't know what the external looked like for you in those moments, but another good example of this external alignment is Alexander Fleming when he discovered that penicillin was antibacterial, right? He just so had happened to be, one, studying bacteria, two, had ignorantly left out a petri dish, right, and didn't put it away properly, was not aseptic with his technique, and then all the external conditions had aligned in such a way that mold started growing on the petri dish and displaying antibacterial properties. And it's like, whoa, amazing. Again, a very ordinary situation, but it had all aligned in one moment to develop potentially the most helpful drug in history so far, right? And then the last bit, or the last of the four, is an emotional charge. There's some emotion there. There has to be, because emotion helps us learn. Emotion is fundamental to learning, and you can't change without learning something, likely. So, does that make sense?
It absolutely does. So let's take a second for the audience, because I think that, and actually I know we're getting a lot of great feedback on our topics, but a lot of people have been internalizing some of this stuff. And so if you're out there listening, I want, maybe think for a second about a transformative moment that you might have had. And then Ryan, right now, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. I'm going to ask you to say those four characteristics of them again. And then I want to talk about maybe break each one down as to how we can prepare ourselves to catch Kairos. Just, I know it's a silly thing, but I want to share it with the audience. I think the tuft of hair was actually in the front of his head. Yeah, so it's like the forehead, right? So you got to grab this dude by the forehead, which for some reason makes a difference to me, which I think is more like impactful. Like when I think about trying to catch this thing as it goes by, you know, you got to grab the dude by the front of the head. so if you're picturing how to catch this moment, you know,
you have to be ready. Then you have to almost see him coming. You have to he has to be in front of you. He can't be then passing you by.
Yeah,
it is a great point. It's a great kind of. Vision, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I think that's what they were doing, right? They were visualizing kind of an ethereal point, right? And the wings on the feet and the tuft of hair on the front, and I think the dude was, when I picture it, I picture like Cupid.
Yeah,
right, but with no arrow and bow, right?
Yeah.
Just in a weird tuft of ponytail on his forehead,
front mullet.
Yeah, like get ready, here comes the dude, and I think that's pretty cool because like maybe you see him out of the corner of the eye, and maybe you don't even realize you've caught him, like I didn't,
Right.
But so what are the 4 things again? Tell me again.
Sure. Yeah. So the anatomy of a transformative moment, anatomy of a Kairos moment. We want to understand that because if we can understand that, then we can invite those moments in, right? And while we can't control everything, we can set the conditions to invite these transformative moments and invite change in our lives. And so, so the first one would be internal readiness, so being ready. The second one would be external alignment. The third one would be a narrative significance. It tells a story. And the fourth one would be that there is some emotional charge there.
Okay, so let's go back to the 3rd grade version of Isaac Newton. Right, he's trying to figure out. He's ready because he's a scientist that's been studying forces, maybe electromagnetic, whatever, and trying to figure out why we stick to the Earth.
Yeah.
Right, we'll go with that.
Yeah.
Right, so he's ready. What was the second one?
Second one would be external alignment. So he sits down by the tree, right, and the conditions had yielded such where apparently it was apple season and there was an apple and it dropped, right? I mean, hey, that's when we speak of like chronos, like linear time, that is also part of that as well. But it is very opportune for him to sit down there in that spot and like have that eureka moment. He needed that needed to be there. And I think that's important. And he controlled that to some degree, right? He chose his place to sit.
And then the third one?
Narrative significance. So for him, yeah, it's tough to say what the narrative significance for him might have been, but he was a scientist and he was doing research and he had a question, or he had all the makings of a good question. What makes the apple fall, right? And so it was important to him and his identity.
And then the fourth?
And the emotional charge. And so they talk of this as like, this eureka moment, like, oh my God, like the apple, like, of course.
Yeah, duh.
Right.
You just hit me in the head. Clearly, and if they're all going to fall.
Right.
This isn't a one-off. This is going to happen.
Right.
So I have another transformative moment.
Please.
And this one's very impactful for me. I might have spoken about it on the podcast before, but when I moved to Middleborough, I decided I wanted to continue my own journey of wrestling, and this is 3 or 4 years post getting myself back in shape. And I found Brick Road, which is a place that is very dear to my heart. And so every Tuesday and Thursday, I would go up there, and at this point, I was 29, 27, something like that. And I realized that I had to warm up. Quick story, I got injured in high school because I didn't warm up properly. So my whole life now, I spend the time warming up. And I find it really valuable to teach the kids that it's important to warm up, even though, like, let's face it, most of them don't have to. Anyways, building good habits around warming up, I digress. Build good habits around warming up in case you get old, which everybody does. So anyways, I would spend about 30 minutes warming up. And the kids were there, and there was always a kids class going on, and I would kind of help out and interject and offer my 2 cents. And then I started doing this warm up, and the kids started kind of following me, and then they started doing more, and then about 30 minutes would go by, and And then I would kind of go and do my own thing and wrestle with the older guys, and the kids would go to kids class. Anyways, I walked in one day and I was late. It was like 5:05, and Freddie looks at me. He's like, "Where you been?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Where have I been? I can come whenever.
Yeah.
He's like, and I looked around, and there was like 50 kids and just as many parents, and they were waiting for me to do this warm up because they found it impactful. It was kind of just we had grown into this thing, and I remember I went in the bathroom, I shut the door, and I was like, "What the hell is going on here?" I was like, "Oh my God, like, am I coaching? Am I a coach? Have I been coaching them the whole time?" Like, and I remember very, very distinctly opening the door and being like, "All right, let's go," and that kicked off what was eventually like basically 10 or 12 years of every Tuesday and Thursday being up there and coaching the kids. And maybe some of the best times I can remember, because it's something that I'm passionate about, love to do. We've talked about this at length. But that was kind of my like aha moment, like, holy crap, like, you're a coach now. And it wasn't something, it was definitely something that changed me. And when I think about internal readiness, like I was certainly prepared.
Right.
External circumstances, they were standing there and being like, "All right, coach, you're late," right?
Yeah.
Emotional charge for sure. Went from nervous and scared in the moment, like, whoa, now I'm responsible for this, to, okay, I'm responsible for this, let's go. And then the narrative change. And the narrative change for me was, man, I was up there, what I thought was doing my own thing, but what I really was doing was kind of building this coaching model for myself and for the kids. So that's another one. And I would argue, or ask the audience and ask you, like, what positive, keep it as super positive as you can, Kairos moment did you have? Not just the weight loss, not just the ups and downs, but like something that, like, really you decided, I don't know, I'm going to give a bad example for someone who doesn't have kids, like, you decided you want to be a mom or a dad. Not when you actually got pregnant or found out, like, maybe that's transformative too, but like, you just decided one day. Right? You decided one day that you wanted to go to nursing school. You decided one day that you wanted to do this. And I think that decisiveness is certainly part of the Kairos moment, right? Like, you got to reach your hand out there. You got to grab that thing by the front ponytail. You got to go after it. So do you have another example?
No, man, I think this is, such a great example. And, it wasn't, I think the point here is that it wasn't anything specifically you did in that moment that yielded the transformation. It was more so when your internal readiness met your external alignment, and when emotional charge sparked action, and when you took all of that and you wove it into your personal narrative, that's transformation, right? And so I guess the point too of this discussion is not necessarily to say that every moment is a transformative moment, or could be. It's just not the point. The point is that every moment could potentially be. Every moment could potentially be, and you have to be ready for that. You have to, all the work that you're doing, whether it is you're reflecting, or you're building a business, or you're working on journaling habits, or meditation, or diet, or habits, whatever it might be, those take time to manifest into transformation. And so you're doing those things for a reason. You just don't really know a lot of the time, but you can only hope that you can be ready, and you can seize the moment when it comes. And obviously you can't really control a lot of the external, alignment of things. You can place yourself into better situations, I'd argue, but all the other things you can really work on, right? And so, we're talking about, the opportunity is there, or the external alignment may or may not be there, but the internal readiness, we can work on that. We can work on our narrative with the story that we tell ourselves. We can work on that. We can work on the emotional awareness and how emotions play a role in telling us, giving us signals, right? Um, Actually, I think it's kind of interesting as well. As I was exploring this concept in depth, I came across how we all know that intuition kind of guides us in some way, right? And maybe for a lot of people that sounds kind of like woo woo, like the idea of intuition. And for a little while, maybe I did as well, and maybe every listener is like, well, intuition, what is that? But there is actually a physiologic process of intuition. It's a very real thing and well studied. This gentleman Antonio Damasio developed this theory called the somatic marker theory, and
Somatic.
somatic, yeah. So meaning, basically meaning within the body, marks within the body, and the idea is that the subconscious brain and the prefrontal cortex will learn patterns and observe and recognize lessons that it then marks with emotion. So in other words, we're not aware of everything that the brain is learning, right? We have our conscious awareness, like I'm hungry, I'm this, I'm that, right? Like we have all the things within our conscious, you know, light, I suppose. Yet our brain is always learning, and we forget that. We forget that every little thing the brain is picking up, it's processing, it's learning, it's shuffling it into some part, of storage. And one of the things that it does is it says, okay, I'm learning these little subtle patterns, and it has no ability to consciously bring this up because they're so complex, right? Some of these things are very complex patterns. And the theory is that our brain will actually mark those learnings with emotions. And so that's why emotions can guide us in some ways. Granted, not all emotions are very real and should be followed. There's some, some dysregulation that can happen, right? But there are a lot of emotions, such as that gut feeling. What is that, right? That gut feeling in somatic marker theory is actually suggesting that your brain has learned that this pattern is either no good or is good, and you should probably follow this. They actually did a study. It's called I think it's called the Iowa Gambling Task. And this is so cool. They basically took two groups of people. One group of people had very healthy brain, very healthy prefrontal cortex, and the other group of people actually had some damage to the prefrontal cortex and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, I believe specifically, and that does impact decision making. And they were trying to figure out, well, why do those people have difficulty with decision making? Because for all the other intents and purposes, they're quite logical. They're quite conscious. They are able to express these very complicated ideas of decision making processes. Right? They can run through a decision matrix and express that very well. So why do they have decision making difficulties? And so what they did is they took these two groups of people and they had them run through, I think, a game, like a gambling game, like 5 different decks of cards, or 4, something like that. Shady on the exact details, so forgive me. But two or three of the decks were rigged, like bad cards, right? And the other 2 deck cards were fine. They were normal. So as they were playing this game, certain decks that they pulled from would be more or less bad, essentially. And what they found was that the people who had the normal functioning brain, as they played these games, they were able to say, ooh, I don't like those decks, the decks that were rigged against their odds. They couldn't tell you why. They couldn't say, well, it's because it's got 3 jokers or whatever in it. But they knew something was off about that deck. They just had a gut feeling. I don't really like this. I'm going to go for the other decks. And it just so happens that they did very well. They would often choose the non-rigged decks and play the game that way. The folks who, I mean, you know where this is going. The folks who had the damage to the prefrontal cortex had no sense of intuition with the decks. They just assumed all were of the same odds, and they were told that all were of the same odds, and they would play this game, and they would consistently lose. They would consistently do worse than the people who had this like gut feeling and followed through with it. And the reason is because the brain is learning, and it's learning to tell us, very complicated patterns through emotion, through feeling. Isn't that interesting?
That is super interesting
Yeah.
and very real. I mean,
Mhm.
we all, like, let's face it. If you are sitting here listening to this and you're saying that intuition is not a real thing, there's nobody out there saying that.
Right.
They're out there saying, I don't really understand it.
Mm.
I don't know what it means. But everybody listening to this podcast has had countless examples where their gut, body, somatic, is something inside them has told them right, wrong, or indifferent.
Mm.
And I've been keep running across this concept of like mechanical science, like anything for it to be real, it has to be qualitative, right? You have to be able to qualify it, quantify it. You have to quantify it, right? You have to like specific examples that are, means and norm, like an average. We got to be able to come up with all of this stuff. And so far, these intuitive things, we seem to not be able to. It sounds like this was a test to figure out how they could quantify intuition.
Right.
But let's face it, everybody listening to this podcast has had some type of intuitive feeling. And everybody that's listening to this podcast has had a transformative moment, right? And we've kind of identified and outlined what those look like and how to become more ready for them. Is there any as I think about like the narrative and the internal feeling, the internal readiness and the emotional attachment, like, is there anything that you could say maybe puts you in a better position, right? Actually, before I ask that question, before you answer it, I would just keep thinking about this like concept that like the ancient Greeks, this is the ancient Greek word for it, right?
Mhm.
But all the steps along the way are all essentially saying the same thing. Like when preparation meets opportunity, right? Failure to prepare is to preparing to fail. Like all of these different books that you read, these philosophers, these deep thinkers, they were all saying essentially the same thing. Now that we have an outline for it, now that we have 4 things that we know pull these together, like what can we do to prep for it?
Right. Right. And this is why I'm pretty deliberate with the use of invite. We invite Kairos. Hey, weird front
Get over
mullet guy.
here.
Come over here. Because we can't necessarily say, yeah, I'm gonna make this moment transformative. That's not how it works. But we can invite that. And so yeah, I mean, I think when I think of like internal readiness, okay, what does that mean? Maybe that means you do some reflection. Maybe you get into the practice of reflecting more. It's something that, granted, we talk about these things, we're not perfect. So we can conceptualize them, but I'm still working on that. Like reflection, I think is very impactful because, it's not until the reflection of your moments, right? As you look down, it's not until you reflected on that it actually became significant, right? You were feeling things in the moment, but it did take the reflection for you to then like maybe put that into action or whatever it might have been. And it took some reflection even prior to, I'm noticing that I'm not really super happy with how things are going. I'm not super happy with my habits. I think I could change. So it took this amount of reflection. And if you can be active with that, again, the more the better. You're inviting it more. So reflecting either with journaling or maybe that's, maybe you just talk to people. Maybe you have real conversations with people. How often do we actually do that? Right. And one of the reasons why, you and I think enjoy these is that we actually have real conversations, things that are interesting, sure, but things that are not superficial. And so do you have real conversations? Do you express your emotions? Do you practice openness, right? When someone brings an idea to you, do you shut it down just because it's not something that you're used to hearing? Or do you think, I'm curious about that, right? And so that's a very important value for inviting Kairos is to be curious, right? Why do people act the way that they do? And wouldn't you like to know that, right? Because I tell you, I talk to a lot of different people just on a daily basis, and none of them are completely irrational. Despite if you were to hear some of the things that I hear, you'd be like, wow, that's very irrational. It's not. It's not completely irrational. There is reasons. Everything about people makes sense, right? And so like understanding that. So that would be like readiness. Would you agree that that kind of like encompasses readiness?
Yeah, I think I like the reflectiveness. I like the openness. I like the idea of inviting him in. I also think there's one word that keeps sticking out. And by the way, just maybe we'll cut this part out, but I just keep picturing myself or myself standing next to a big net with a spear and a bunch of apples in the net, like waiting to catch this dude. Like I don't know why that keeps going through in my brain. Like, come on, Kairos, come here, buddy.
Yeah, let's cut that.
Yeah. Okay. No, but the other piece that is, I think people should recognize, and at least my intuition is telling me, like, it's decisiveness, right? Like, whatever example you want to use, like Archimedes, he's like, this is the way, right? The apple, this is the way, right? My own weight loss journey, this is the way. Like once I had to reach my hand out there and grab him, but once I got him, this is the way. And so once you feel it, or maybe even just as a way to kind of prepare yourself for it, like start making decisive action, start taking decisive action. Like an example that just came into my head is like I have a friend of mine that I'm becoming. That we're kind of becoming friends at this right through this process where we met, we found out, realized we enjoy each other's company at the gym. We talk to each other, and then I decided I'm going to call him and be like, hey, you want to go to a breathwork event? I think there's something you'll enjoy, right? That's a decisive action, and when I decided, it essentially became a transformative moment, right? Like now I have a friend that I can call, and he answers the phone, right? And so, inclusive of openness and reflection, being decisive definitely is part of catching these Kairos moments.
Yeah. And I'd argue too that there's, decisiveness, pre-decisiveness is listening to that maybe gut feeling that like, ooh, I don't know why I seem to enjoy this person's company, but there is something that I like about that. And even if it's just like more somatic, I feel that in the body. Yeah, then that you're listening to that and running with it as opposed to like, fence sitting and you're not making decisions. So I really enjoy that. I suppose the other thing too would be awareness, right? We talk a lot about awareness and presence, but how can you, all the conditions, right? So every condition aligned for you to have that moment in, after the shower. But if you were distracted by, I don't know, like politics or what a friend said to you that made you embarrassed, or the mistake that you made earlier in the day, if you were distracted by that, well, guess who you're missing?
It's going right by.
Yep, he's
Crazy hair and everything.
He's running right by you. So the practice of these practices, while journaling can be a very like reflection are part of awareness, I think like the idea of meditations do help you be present of the moments. If not that, then they help you be aware that you're not present, and maybe that's also a powerful thing. So practicing that. While we're talking mostly, and I find it mostly intriguing, the ordinary moments that become transformed and riddled with potential, novelty and experiencing new things is a very quick way to experience transformative moments, right? And I think that's kind of, to me, that's common sense, right? You go do something that you've never done before, feels a little weird, feels a little odd, feels a little not like you. Well, that yields the transformation. And so, saying yes to things that you haven't said yes to before, or just doing things like, maybe, the example of you and the friend there, maybe this person has never gotten into breath work. Maybe they don't even know what that is. You say breath work, and they're like, wow, you are a very weird guy. But maybe he does say yes, and maybe that then transforms him in some way. And I think that would be kind of interesting. So so there's that. And then in terms of like, we talk about the narrative and the story and whatnot, and that is also built through reflection, right? It's not until you reflect that it becomes a story. And so I think out of those actionable steps, journal, reflect in your journaling, right? Like, not just journal ahead, like what I want to do for the day or what I want to do for the week or resolutions or whatever. Reflect on how the day went, reflect on how the week went, and pick out these moments that might have been impactful that you just missed. Meditate, right? Like do some meditation, even if it's just checking in. It doesn't need to be cross-legged, fingers up meditation. It just can be checking in with yourself, right? Um, staying open to new opportunities, saying yes, talking to new people, experiencing new situations, and just generally understanding that everything that we're doing, right? Every little action we take, every little conversation, every little thought, really is preparing us for these moments. And so if you make a mistake or you feel that you made a mistake or you feel that you failed, well, cliche to say that like failure leads to transformation, it is true in some sense. That is an important thread that, eventually will kind of converge into a transformative moment. And so everything matters.
Yeah, I love it. I think, for those listening, those are some really pretty specific ways that we can catch these Kairos moments, these moments where success is built or transformation happens. But I would say that the most impactful thing that you said today for me was to invite them.
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself in positions where Kairos might come, right?
Mm-hmm.
And invite them in and be ready, be decisive, go after them. I love it.
Don't let them pass you by. Yeah, great. No, and if you guys do have transformative moments, ordinary ones, right? I'm curious. I really am, and this is something that I'm sure I'll be talking more about, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations on. But please let us know. Send me a message on Instagram, or leave a comment on Spotify, or send MJ a DM, because I really do want to know what goes into these moments even further than what we've already kind of discussed here. So if you have an ordinary moment that was, really really transformative to you, there was a feeling associated with that. There are lots of feelings associated with these moments, typically that emotional charge that we talk about. Please let us know. Would love to hear about it. And yeah, you can follow us on Spotify. You can follow us on Instagrams. Our handle will be down below. And yeah, leave a like, follow, all that kind of jazz, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.